Welcome, everyone. It's Angelo Robles, host of the Angelo Robles podcast and the founder and CEO at Family Office Association. Today, we are going to be covering influence and impact. And we have a very special guest that will be Bill Berman, who has helped leaders and their teams through assessment, development, planning, coaching, and consulting to executives. He began his career as an academic, practicing clinical psychologist, teaching and conducting research at Cornell University Medical College and Fordham University. He received his tenure in 1994. At the same time, Bill started a software and services company to manage healthcare outcomes, which he grew and substantially sold to an enterprise in the healthcare information systems. Berman Leadership, his current company, has been accepted into Forbes Coaches Council, an invitation-only community for leading business and career coaches. Bill, it really is a pleasure and an honor to have you on the show.
Great to be here, Angelo. Thanks very much.
I have a lot of questions, and I know you're going to be a little bit more crunched for time than we're used to. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Bill, what does it mean to be influential?
So influence is really, it's about making sure that people know that you're the can-do person who's going to get the job done, whatever that job is, and who's on our side. So you need to have people believing that what you care about is what they care about, and what they care about is what you care about. And that you are somebody who can get the work done, who can get it done fast, who can get it done on time, and who can get it done with quality. And that's the fundamental element of influence.
How do you become influential?
You start out by building credibility and expertise. So you'll see a lot of literature that talks about things like gravitas and executive presence and things like that. But the first thing you have to establish is that you are credible. You do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. You follow through on things, and that you have expertise, that you have an area where you know something and can make a contribution to. And you do that on a regular basis. Without that, you can't build influence. So you start with that. And then once you've got that established, you start to use other tools to gain influence, such as providing insights, not just information, providing the so what instead of just the what about something. You get it by being clear and crisp and focused. You get it by understanding your audience and reading your audience and communicating at the level that they need, not the level you want. So influence is all about making sure that you understand who your audience is, who your customer is, who your stakeholders are, and you're meeting their needs in your role.
Are we born innately influential? Is it environment, mainly our upbringing, or is it acknowledged and learned?
So I think I think there's, like most things, it's not one or the other. It's a combination of the two. So your ability to be conscientious, to be thorough, to be attentive, to be responsive to deadlines, that's partly innate. That's partly a personality characteristic, but it's not carved in stone. Anybody can learn to be credible, to be responsive, to be attentive to the needs of the organization and the needs of the people around you. Some people it's easier than others, but I think most people can learn how to do that effectively. I think some of the other things like charm, like presence, that's a combination of learning and innate also. Some people are just more charming, more engaging than others. But, getting media training, learning how to talk, seeing yourself on video are all tools you can use to learn to have that influence.
And I suppose for a context from my audience perspective, there are a combination of entrepreneurs, of executives that work in a family office or foundation. We have a lot of listeners and viewers that are investment professionals, many that are highly successful families and entrepreneurs. And lately, given my interest in a lot of the things I do from a technological and digital perspective, a lot of younger techies and wannabe, I'll use the word in a very positive way, entrepreneurs. So
Yep.
often it's not the traditional executive inside a traditional multi-layered management company. It's a much more sometimes singular, sometimes two or three, sometimes 5 or 10 people, rarely more than that. So does that make any difference in terms of being of influence when I suppose the spotlight is even more on you to the person who makes hiring and firing decisions?
Absolutely. And I think influence is always dependent on influence with whom and influence how. So there's a difference between how I'm going to influence my organization when I'm a 10,000 person organization, how I'm going to influence when it's 20 people in a startup, or when I'm going to influence when it's in the broader world. So what it takes to be influential in Congress is somewhat different than it is to be influential in a startup, right? But it's the same, it starts with the same. You can't be influential in Congress if you don't have credibility and expertise, if you're not contributing to things in a significant way and making things happen. So those are always critical.
You hinted at credibility and more so the latter word, expertise. When you're really young, my son, his first official day in college is today.
Yep.
But there's entrepreneurs that are 18, 19, 20 years old. Maybe in their own way, they do have expertise. Do you fake it until you make it? How do you take something from nothing and have influence?
Well, if I'm a 19-year-old entrepreneur, and starting a software company or a SaaS company, my credibility is in that specific technological area that I'm focused on. And what you see in the successful entrepreneurs is an enormous degree of focus. They are focused on that particular value that they're adding, and they don't get broad and they don't get expansive until they've already made some progress. So when you look at take Facebook as a simple example, Zuckerberg was totally focused. In fact, he limited the accessibility to just to colleges for a long period of time before he mastered that and developed the expertise that he had in creating that sense of community. And only then did he expand it out beyond colleges. So I think the part of the way you do that expertise is by knowing where your strengths are, knowing where you add value, and really focusing in on that.
And I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit, but I'm thinking of Ray Dalio, who, like us, is based in Connecticut as well.
Yep.
And he always writes about beware of ego and blind spots. And no matter who you are, including him, we all have them. How does that play into our ability to influence?
I'm not a scholar of Greek literature, but the concept of hubris, the idea of thinking that you're more important and more special than you are, is, I think, what Dalio is talking about. When you start to let that arrogance or that overconfidence dominate you, what happens is you start to spread out. You start to think that you have answers to everything. You start to think that you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. And if you don't let the ego get a hold of you, you can stay focused. You can be really strong in your own area, and then you can rely on other people to help you in the areas that you're not an expert in. That's why humility is such an important aspect, whether it's of leadership or entrepreneurship or any type of public service. If you understand where your strengths lie and where your value is, and you understand what you don't do as well, you can leverage your capabilities and other people's capabilities to be much more effective than if you try to do it all yourself.
You hinted at it earlier, but I'll directly ask it. Is there a difference between what you call gravitas, I may call charisma, and influence?
I think there's a big difference. So I think charisma is a form of charm and ability to engage people that makes them like you, that makes them think that you're cool or special. It's But you can have, you know this, you see family offices, people who've been enormously successful who don't have a lot of charisma. They don't have a lot of charm, but they're incredibly smart, incredibly capable. They identified a niche, or they identified an area where they could grow and expand and make a contribution. And they did it. A lot of my clients will talk about leading by example, not by charisma. And a lot of very successful leaders do the right things, and they lead and they manage through setting those good examples. And when you set those good examples, people will follow you. So there's the difference between influence and charisma is really the difference between strong followership and positive communication. And the other side of that is you can see people who are what some call empty suits. They're charming, they're engaging, they talk well, they say the right things, but they can't deliver, they can't meet expectations, they don't follow through. They're just not, there's no substance behind the flash.
I think one of my most marquee questions today, and there's a subtle difference, but to me it's there, is being an influencer and being of influence the same thing?
I think the answer is yes, but I'm going to qualify that. If you're talking about, when you say being an influencer, if you're talking about being an internet influencer, a social media influencer, there's an enormous difference there, because when you're an influencer, it's all about capturing people's attention, getting people interested in you, getting people to like you. I think there's some overlap with being of influence, because those are people who people pay attention to, they listen to, they want to follow, they take their advice, but being an influencer is largely about creating an audience and then being able to be a marketing vehicle to that audience from your advertisers. Being of influence in an organization is really about meeting the needs of your manager, your manager's manager, and your stakeholders, the people around you, your own team, your peers, your colleagues, your suppliers, and your vendors. So it's a different kind of audience. I think that influencers on the internet are more about volume and charisma than they are about substantive influence.
And we're going to get to some of that later, because there's very intriguing things happening in that community that directly and indirectly relate to the subject today. But on what you said, I noted earlier, within most family units, within most family foundations, family offices, and startup entrepreneurial enterprises, they're usually small. One person, a team, 2 or 3, maybe even after a little bit of traction, 5 or 10. What I'm getting to in terms of being influential is everything stands out because it's so small. You know everything about the person next to you. You're probably effectively in the same room. Well, maybe not now during COVID. Whereas in a large organization, if you're not so great, I hate to say you could fake it, but as long as you don't rock the boat too much, you may be able to glide and get by. In a really small enterprise with hopefully high expectations, you can't do that. You can't fake being of influence. You can't fake really being part of a team. I'm assuming that's more difficult.
That's absolutely true. And in the family offices that I've worked with, they're, like you said, they're 10, 11, 12 people. But in that context, every one of those people knows what their job is, they know what they're accountable for, and they get it done on a very consistent basis. And they don't necessarily, most of the time that I've seen it, they don't overstep their boundaries. So they're not trying to do their peer's job. They're not trying to do their boss's job. They're focused on, what am I here to do? What's the work to be done? And that's a key to credibility. That's a key to having influence is that you do your job, you do the job you're there to do according to the people around you, whether that's your peers or your managers. So the lawyer that works at the family office I'm connected with, she is superlative in the areas of law that she needs to be superlative in. She doesn't get caught up in the finances. She doesn't get caught up in trading. She doesn't get caught up in any kind of administrative stuff. She knows where her swim lane is and she stays there. And that gets her enormous credibility with the family members. So I think that's, and you can skate by in a large organization by sort of saying the right things to some extent, but usually at some point somebody finds out.
Of course, never happened to me, but yes, I would assume that inevitably could be the case. Is being of influence more difficult now during an often remote working environment? Or in some ways, is it easier to be of influence? I would think it would be more difficult, but I would love your opinion.
I think it's harder to be of influence I think everything's harder during COVID, during the pandemic. I think because people are distracted, they're thinking about other things, they're not in person, we're accustomed to sitting in rooms with each other. But when you think about global organizations have been virtual for a long period of time. I worked with a number of companies that are British or European companies with significant US presence. All of that is virtual unless they're getting on a plane and flying to the other locations. And so they're accustomed to that kind of intermittent remote conversations. And I think, again, it comes back to, do you understand what your responsibilities are? Do you understand what's needed from your organization? And are you focused on delivering that on a reliable, consistent basis over time? And those are still things you can do, whether you're sitting next to somebody or you're 1,000 miles away. So I think it still comes down to, are you getting your job done? And are you getting the job done that the people around you want you to do?
It's probably a little bit semantics, but sometimes, like in the being of influence and being an influencer, there may be subtle differences. Is being an influencer the same as building a brand? Sometimes families, we can name several that are known global brands. They take pride to some degree in their reputation, their PR management. Influence and brand, maybe also social media influencer, their brand. Are they effectively the same thing, or are there subtle differences?
I think there are subtle differences. I think everybody has a brand. The part of the question is, do you know what that brand is? And is it what you want it to be? So a family office may not have a brand as far as the broad world is concerned, but they probably have a brand with regard to the people who really matter, to investors, to banks, to private equity. They know who to go to. Those organizations know which family offices to go to for what kinds of things. And they know what they care about and they know what they don't care about. And that's a part of your brand. Your brand is essentially, what am I known for? What am I good at? Where do I add value to whatever it is I'm doing? And that's what your brand is. And family offices have that for the people who matter, and individuals have that for the people who matter. Your brand may be that he's charming but kind of superficial. It may be that, man, that person gets stuff done. It may be that she's an unbelievable expert with enormous credibility. It could be any of those kinds of things. You have to make sure that your brand is what you want it to be and that you know what it is.
My next question, I suppose, relates potentially intra-family in business, but now we're going to bring in a little bit of your personal dynamics with people that you meet and being of influence. How important is social proof, authority, liking? How do these affect our ability to influence others?
So the social context of an individual is absolutely critical to having influence. But so when you're a senior executive, you know, the old joke is every time you get promoted, your jokes get funnier. And people listen to you more. Well, they do, but it's because of your position. They do it because they have to do it, because it's important for them to do it, because you carry weight over them. So that is influence. But what we're talking about is the ability to influence people who don't, you're not in control of, who you don't have some authority over. And I think so. Social proof is relevant. Building authority by expertise, building authority by credibility, building authority and influence by getting people to want to do what you want them to do, getting them to follow you is really what's critical. And I think authority is kind of, I won't call it outmoded because there are a lot of situations of authority, but I think people less and less rely on authoritative actions to get work done, and they do much more to persuade people to go the direction they want them to go. You know, there are still situations where an executive says, you know what, we're doing this, we're going over that hill, go make it happen. And there's no debate, there's no discussion, you just go do it. But there's a lot more situations where it gets co-created, where a leadership team as a whole comes up with what the solution is and executes on it. I think successful leaders are less likely to be dictatorial about what needs to happen and more likely to be influential about what needs to happen.
A related question, I'm going to use different words: attractiveness, similarity, compliments, contact, and cooperation. Can these make a person more influential?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And part of it depends on the culture of the organization, the culture of the place that you're working in. Because there are some cultures where being collaborative is the wrong choice. There are some cultures where people want you to go be independent and make your own decisions and set the ball rolling. I know people at Amazon where they absolutely don't want you to spend time building collaborative relationships. They want you to get the work done. I have other clients where they spend hours and days and weeks building consensus, building a collaborative environment, getting everybody on board, and making sure that people want to do what they want them to do. So it really depends on the culture of the organization that you're working in, or even, you know, in the family office where you're on the buy side, not the sell side. It's where you want to go and where your brand takes you. I think those are factors. All those factors have an effect on your influence. Charm, charisma, attractiveness, absolutely. We know that people who are attractive gain more attention, that people look at them more, they pay more attention to them. I don't love that because it's not something most of us have control over. But it does give a message to people who want to be able to dress the way they want to dress, who want to be able to look the way they want to look, be able to be them, quote, be themselves, end quote. If being yourself doesn't fit in with the organization that you're working in, that makes it harder to be influential. It doesn't make it impossible, but it does make it harder. I had a client once who was really capable banker. He was really moving the business forward, and he was working at a global investment bank. And as you can imagine, they were all in suits and ties and cufflinks, and those ties were Brioni and the suits were Zegna, right? And he was coming to work in short sleeve shirts and khakis. And his boss, fortunately, he had a boss who was smart enough to know that it mattered. And he said, you know what, I'm going to take you out. We're going to go shopping and we're going to get you some real clothes. I want you to burn the ones you're wearing and never bring them back to this place, because You don't have any credibility by dressing the way you're dressing. And it's not a part of who you are. It's just your dress.
Absolutely. In theory, should it matter? No, but in reality, we're humans. We make decisions and first impressions. I'll reverse that a little bit, though. You're correct in that investment banking environment, New York, Boston, DC, wherever. But where I have a lot of followers in Palo Alto and Silicon Valley, it'd be the reverse of that. You would stand out like a sore thumb, like you're trying to stand out wearing a suit and tie, when I know a lot of them, some of them worth billions, walk around in jeans and Crocs. So I suppose you do have to kind of fit into those that are, pardon the pun, in a position of influence, whether you like it or not. Unless you want to be your own entrepreneur and do your own thing, then do it.
You know, it's funny. I live next door to Greenwich. I live in Stamford, and Greenwich, as you know, is the hedge fund capital. And I've had situations where I've gone to a hedge fund in Greenwich and I have to wear, maybe khakis and a polo. That's the most dressed up I would be. But then I got to change before I go to that hedge fund in the middle of Manhattan, because they're all in suits and ties and coats, right? So I find it works better if you try to align yourself to the environment that you're in.
I'm going to ask a two-part question. In a family or traditional business, does your position, your hierarchy, we kind of discussed this, automatically dictate your ability to influence? But the part two, if so, then position and title matter when they likely, I could argue, should not. Aren't the organizations of today supposed to be flat, more bottoms up, not top down, not dictatorship? Times and things change, but does this go back to our ancestors, the caveman days? Is what makes a person influential, has it really not changed much in thousands of years?
The person who can take away your salary, or who you think can take away your salary, or take away your livelihood, or hit you on the head with a club if you don't fall in line, they're always going to have control over you. I'm not sure I would call it a influence. They have authority over you. They can do things. But I worked with a company where the CEO decided that they needed to make a significant change in how they in their whole go-to-market strategy for the business that they were in. And he said, I want this to happen, and let's make it happen. And a year later, they came back and he said, what the hell happened? I told you I wanted this to happen. Nobody had taken action on it. Why? Because he just tried to dictate to them what they should do. And they didn't have a stake in what he wanted, so they didn't follow up. And this is the CEO of a public company. So, it's easy these days, particularly in a virtual environment, to do what I call be passive aggressive, to say, yeah, sure, we'll do what you want, and then go off and do whatever it is you think you want to do. It's very easy to get away with that. Now, that's not going to get you promoted, but it's probably not going to get you fired either.
Probably not. Tonality, eye contact, body language, from our personal lives of influence to our families and business. I was always told, let me know if I'm correct, they'll remember what you might have first said and at the end, but they're not going to remember in the middle. Actually, after a week, they probably won't even remember anything. But they may remember, especially early on in your engagement with them, especially the first time, your voice, your tonality, your body language is most of our communication, which impacts influence nonverbal.
Absolutely. It's been well established that a significant amount of how trustworthy you are, how confident people are in what you say, how willing people are to follow you does not come from what you say. It comes from what you do and how you do it. I had a mentor who once said to me, people may not remember what you told them, but they're absolutely going to remember how you made them feel.
Yep, that's a classic.
And it's true. If it's funny, I do a lot of public speaking coaching in the context of the executive coaching I do. And one of the things that I will tell people consistently is think about not what you want them just to take away, what you want them to know. Think about how you want them to feel when they leave the room. Because that's what you want to create, is that feeling for them. And it's less important that unless what you want them to feel is informed and educated and knowledgeable, then you got to give them some real substantive information. But a lot of times that's not just what you want them to feel. You want them to feel excited or motivated or happy or stimulated. You know, there are different kinds of feelings you want to create depending on the context you're working in.
Somewhere I learned, it might have been from psychology, so maybe some of your background, maybe it's in a myth. Why is asking someone to do something for us, a favor, where they're not going to get anything back in return, actually give us, I hate to use the word control, maybe more influence? We're the one asking them to do something. They're taking time out to do it. And yet they have a greater bond to us now than before, even though we're not reciprocating.
You know, there's a guy named Robert Cialdini who's written a book called Persuasion.
Yes.
And he's a social psychologist who's done a tremendous amount of research over the past 30 years or so on the notion of how do we get other people to do what we want them to do. And he's written a couple of books on it. They're great resources.
Yes, well known.
You know, we do know that by doing a favor for somebody, they begin to feel some sense of reciprocity, like they feel a little bit like they owe you because you did them a favor. So they're a little bit more predisposed to helping you when you ask for something. And it's, you know, it has to do with the notion of a just world, the notion of balance and equality, the notion of not wanting to be obligated to somebody else. So you return the favor so you don't feel like you owe that person something. There's a lot of psychological processes that go on that make those kinds of things important. And they are important. It's one of the, you know, and when we talk about doing something for somebody, you know, one of the most important things you can do for another person is listen, is really listen. And not when you know, a lot of times when people listen, what they do is they listen to about the first half of the sentence or the first half of the first 2 minutes of the message. And then they start thinking about what their response is going to be, or how they're going to address this, or how they're going to disagree with this. And they stop hearing the other person. And so they miss that last piece, whether it's 20% or 50%. And that invariably comes across. If I'm not listening to you, if I'm thinking about my own response, you can tell from my expression, from the way I'm responding to you, whether I'm listening to you or not. So one of the things I tell my clients is make sure that you listen to them till they're done. You'll figure out what you need to say in response, but stay with your audience, stay in the present until they're finished saying what they're saying, and make sure then that they understand, that they know you heard them, right? Whether you do what they said or you take action on what they said is a whole nother thing, but you want them to know that you heard them and you understood what they were saying. And that gives you influence, because then they feel like you care about them. They feel like you're invested in them. And so they want to reciprocate. They want to return the favor.
What's the difference between being influential and manipulating?
Well, there's a bit of a Machiavellian approach in being influential, but I think the fundamental difference is that when you're trying to influence people, you're doing it because it's in the best interest of the company that you're working for. When you're being manipulative, it's usually in your own best interest. So if I say something to you that is going to serve my purposes, but not yours, or going to serve my purposes, but not the company's, that's manipulative. If I'm getting you to do something because it's in the best interest of the organization, because it adds value to the organization, I'm not sure, you know, you could see it as manipulative, but I still see it as influential because it's for the greater good, not for personal gain. You know, it goes back to what you said earlier about ego getting in the way. If you've got ego in the way, if you've got self-interest in the way, people are going to notice that, they're going to pay attention to it, and you're going to come across as disingenuous and uncaring. And eventually that will catch up with you.
Bill, how do you define leadership?
We'd need a whole nother hour to talk about that.
Well, let's do it in 60 seconds.
All right. You want in the 60-second answer, a great leader gives their people three things: something to believe in, someone to believe in, and someone who believes in them. So think about it. Can I expound on that a little? We have time?
Yes, I do have a lot of questions, but we could do a little bit more on it.
Okay. So you want people to know that you have a vision and a strategy to get there. That's something to believe in, that you know where you're heading and what you're going to do to get there, right? That's the first piece. You want people somebody to believe in, someone to believe in. Well, they have to know you have integrity. They have to know they can count on you. They have to know they can trust you, right? Because you're investing a lot with them. So they have to have a feeling that you're going to have their back. You know, there's different levels of trust in any relationship, but the most important one is, does this person have my back? If I'm in trouble, are they there for me? Right? And that's the kind of trust you want to build. That's what it means to have someone to believe in. And someone who believes in them, do you trust me enough to let me do my job? Do you trust me enough to believe that I'm going to get it done? Do you give me the space and the tools and the resources to accomplish what I'm here to do? And will you tell me, go do it? Go get it done. I know you can do it. And that doesn't mean that you're sweet and nice and soft with people. You can be really tough. Some of the best people I've had as mentors and friends of mine have had as mentors are people who were really tough on you, but always knew you were going to get there. And those people made it really important contribution to my life. And I think they do to most of us.
Does leadership, although maybe not humans, because I gave the cave fan example earlier, but does leadership change over time? As an example, I'm a football fan. When you say name a great coach, I think of Vince Lombardi. Right. But I also do agree that was many decades ago. Athletes have more power now. They make way, way, way more money. And that style of coaching for professionals would probably need to adapt. And that may have applied with the 80s, I think, of Jack Welch. Now, I do think if you were to take them in today's era, they would adapt, still have their foundation and be great, but they wouldn't be exactly how they were back in those eras.
I think that's right. And I think it can be different if you're the CEO of a 10,000 person company or 100,000 person company versus the CEO of a 20 person company. But I think that what has changed is people's tolerance for criticism. I think there's lower tolerance for that criticism. I think you have to earn the right to be critical of people, yes. Whereas in the past you had the right to be critical. I think you have to earn the right to tell people what to do, whereas in the past you just got to tell people what to do. Leadership in the most of the 20th century was about control and command. It was about making sure that things got done in the way they needed to get done, at the pace they needed to get done, and don't question authority, right? In the 21st century, it is much more about how do we work together to accomplish shared goals. And I think that part of leadership has changed, and I think it's much more important. And again, people want to know why. I don't know if you know Simon Sinek, but he's written a lot about the why we're doing, why are we doing things. And I think he's right. I think he's absolutely on target. People want to know what their motivation is. They want to know what the greater good they're serving. Not everybody. Certainly some people are perfectly happy selling widgets and they don't care, but a lot of people want to know what impact they're having. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, that a lot of companies are taking stands on things that they never would have taken stands on before. And executives are taking the risk of saying, we believe in this point of view, or we believe in that point of view, because the people who work for them want them to do that. They expect them to do that. And they have the power they have authority. Individuals have authority. They can leave, they can move somewhere else. You know, again, if you go back to the 20th century, at IBM or GE or Procter and Gamble, you could stay there for 40 years and they would take care of you, and they would pay you'd have a pension, and they'd give you a job, and they'd let you do they'd have you doing something. Nowadays, people don't have any confidence that an organization's going to keep them on for any length of time, and they're frequently looking at other alternatives. Where else can I go? What else can I do? And mobility is much more an option for them now. Even now, it's huge compared to what it was 2 years ago because of the virtual environment we're in now.
Absolutely. To a degree, it does place more of a position of power, in your example, to the employee, with some caveats. They need to be really good at what they do. They probably need to network well and have optionality. But yes, that arguably is easier potentially in today's world. I have probably about 10 questions I'd like to get to. I'm going to skip over some I have planned. We'll go a little bit more lightning round because I think they're important and the audience will enjoy them. How do we acknowledge, as a leader of someone of influence, that we need to avoid cognitive biases, other biases, even groupthink? I would think, running a family office, I wouldn't want an employee that may disagree with me on something, but is afraid to acknowledge it. They fall into groupthink, effectively what we used to call yes men, yes people, whatever. How do we avoid that trap?
You have to actively work to create an environment where people are comfortable giving you feedback and telling you that something is wrong or there's a problem. It's people most people by nature are a little bit afraid of authority. They're afraid of losing their job. They're afraid of not getting the next bonus or the next promotion. And even in a small office, they're afraid of disappointing, of hurting the person's feelings. I know a lot of very successful people have relatively thin skins, and they don't necessarily want to hear what they don't want to hear. But you need people around you. You have to actively promote the idea that if you think there's something wrong or you think there's a problem, I'll never punish you. I'll never come back at you because you told me that we could make things better. So you have to work with that.
Here's another one that we could go on for an hour. We'll try to keep a minute. It's a tough one to do in a short amount of time. Do you believe that emotional intelligence, bringing up your psychology background, is to some degree underrated by family and business leaders? I would like to get into how do we acknowledge it? How can we test for it? How do we improve it? I just don't know if we're going to have the time.
I think emotional intelligence is undervalued in most financial services businesses, and that would include family offices. I think it tends to have much more to do with what's the deal you're bringing me, what's the benefit of what you're bringing, where's your expertise. And that's important, but in any large organization, that emotional intelligence is going to take you a long way in getting done what you want to get done.
No doubt about it. Related to that, how does emotional intelligence, and we've had on Dr. Mark Brackett, also based in Connecticut, who's an iconic figure in that at Yale. So how does emotional intelligence intertwine within executive function, which I'm assuming from my limited knowledge includes our cognitive flexibility, and I think one that we gravely underestimate in successful people, impulse control?
Absolutely, 100% right. There are 4 pieces to emotional intelligence. There's self-awareness, there's self-control, there's awareness of the emotions of others, and the ability to use those emotions to help accomplish your goals. And the number two piece, the self-control, is absolutely critical to people's success. If you, the most successful leaders I know are relatively even-keeled, relatively emotionally stable. They can get pretty energized around things, but for the most part, they do that intentionally. I was recently working with somebody, and I watched him intentionally lose his temper, but he knew exactly what he was doing. He used it as a negotiating technique, and he could stop it on a dime. So it's because he knows what he's like, he knows what his emotions are, and he could use them in that context.
How will elders, as we call them in my community, elders in the family and in businesses, adapt to the massive and I think somewhat unique generation, I guess what, 24 and under, that is Generation Z? I deal with a fair number of them. Some of them have worked in internship and other roles for me. Highly educated, wickedly smart, incredibly, obviously, proficient with technology. And that is all things that are trending. And they will, sooner rather than later, be the entrepreneurs, be the C-level executives. I don't see them changing a lot. We may need to adapt more to them. Again, this could go on for an hour, and I'm limiting it to a 1-minute response. And we're also a little off topic. I get it, but I wanted to ask it.
You know, us baby boomers think we're going to live forever, and that we're never going to have to stop working or slow down. But we are going to have to pass the baton to the younger generation. And if we don't pass it to them, they're going to grab it from us.
For sure. More so than I think even the millennials.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. I had a client of mine say to me that he thought the notion of this millennial and, entitlement was a myth, that he thought it was mostly socioeconomic status that determined how entitled people are. And I agree with him. I think that I know lots of people who grew up a little bit hungry, a little bit struggling, had to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And they're not entitled, and they work for what they get. And I think there are other people who grew up with, and this is particularly relevant to family offices, who grew up with so many options and so many choices and so much stuff that they don't have any ability to focus in and identify what's of value, because they haven't learned to have to generate value. And I think, you see this in the best, strongest families, even the wealthiest families. The kids know who they are. They know what they're trying to accomplish. They go out and they do it, and they do it well. And then there are other ones where the kids just struggle because they can't find themselves. And that's to some extent our responsibility.
Okay, in our final, before we get to a close, I would say about 5 minutes. I'm going to get to what some people refer to, and I don't know if they're so positive about it, Angelo's crazy stuff. Here we go. Influencers, going back to a little bit of our earlier discussion, influencers have changed over the years. Social media is now in play. I think of someone that came from Connecticut, our backyard, Charli D'Amelio at TikTok, 120 million or so followers. Joe Biden had 80 million votes. That's an incredibly influential person, a Mr. Beast on YouTube. I could go on and on. So this is a phenomenon that really in the last couple of years has risen. Imagine the money they're making, the influence they have. Some of them are being invited as to be partners or brand ambassadors on VC companies and tech companies. And one day when they want to run for a political office, assuming they still have a lot of followers, there is no question they are going to be a force.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, it's interesting. I won't profess to understand that, because a lot of times these are people who aren't influencing others by expertise or by credibility. Charli, I think she does it by dancing. I'm not sure.
But that's evolved over the years.
But she got at people's attention by doing that. And now people want to pay attention to her. You know, she does that kind of success runs the risk of falling off a cliff at some point too. So there's always a risk of that with the social media presence. But I think people are paying much more attention to small details, to small actions. I think in some ways credibility and expertise are less important in that context than they are in other contexts. But again, people have to like her and see that she adds value to them and then care about what her opinion is. And she can certainly leverage that into a whole career, and a hugely successful one.
For sure. And I could scare our audience a little bit, especially people closer to my age and older. But given I'm active in much of this community and in the crypto and digital world, we are at the forefront in what's happening in that community in the metaverse and something called an avatar, which is soon we're going to start to see being created by AI. And you're not going to notice the difference. In other words, AI is going to create avatars and social media handles and messaging that will influence a lot of people, and it's not even a real person.
That's right.
So stay tuned. I mean, this is coming not in 10 years. Actually, it's kind of here right now, but I would say in 2 or 3 years, it's going to be a big, big thing. And it may be a little off topic, but I think with your intelligence, you'll bring it back. It's all good. A conservative company, Visa, has purchased for 6 figures an NFT, which some people will say, Angelo, that's nothing more than maybe digital art, a JPEG. Well, really, it's a signature in the blockchain. And they purchased it for whatever, I think it was 150,000. Yeah. It's a CryptoPunk, it's called. It's now worth a hell of a lot more. I think this is symbolic. They did it for a strategic reason relative, going back to your word, of influence. I don't know if you have a specific takeaway on that or comment, but I'm all ears.
Well, you know, I have clients who think that crypto and NFTs are scams and are going to fall off a cliff. And I have people who think it's the future of investing. I don't pretend to have expertise in that, but, you know, NFTs can be as ephemeral as you said, as a JPEG. They can be as substantial as the Playboy archives. You know, so there's various types of NFTs, you know.
That's true.
And there are some that are better than others. But it's I think that world is changing. And I think that's different. My understanding, and again, I'm not an expert in this, is that there's so much money around that people keep looking for new places to put it. And these have kind of evolved, the substance has evolved to meet the need rather than the other way around.
Well, I mean, this also relates to young people that I know, even from wealthy families, let's call it that Gen Z or under 25. A lot of them are not trusting in big corporations. They may trust in a Tesla, but they're looking at something that's decentralized like crypto. Now, I could argue, is it really totally decentralized? I don't want to make this a crypto and digital conversation, although a little part of it obviously will play into that. My part 2 of that, I look at a crypto like Doge, which was meant to be a joke of a dog, the Shiba Inu, yet somehow with Elon Musk and other support has actually took off, and I dare say is quasi legit. So I look at Doge, I look at Shiba Inu, which now has its own crypto. I look at meme stocks, I look at influencers on Reddit, on Twitter. We're in a radically different world. And even though I'm on top of it, what I thought made me knowledgeable a month or 2 ago, I am now dated relative to what's happening in NFTs and CryptoPunks and the Bored Apes Yacht Club and how these things are going up thousands-fold.
Yeah.
Now, I'm catching up, but am I going to be a dollar short and a day late? We'll see.
We'll see. You know, it's that kind of the ability to influence like Elon Musk has. Again, Elon Musk has that influence because of his credibility and expertise. Nobody can deny that he's made some enormous accomplishments and really moved technology forward in remarkable ways. So people pay attention when he says, I think this is cool. People are going to pay attention to that. It still most of the time it comes back to credibility and expertise first and foremost. But certainly not all the time. Sometimes it's based on fear. That you can influence an enormous amount with fear and anxiety. But, is that really who you want to be? That's the question.
We that would make a great discussion on politics. Ooh, I'd love to do that one. And maybe when we get close to maybe the midterm elections, which could be a while away. But eventually we will cover that with Bill. Bill, we probably have about a minute and a half left. What would you say is the main message, the takeaway from your book? And what's the name of the book and how could they purchase it?
So the book is Influence and Impact. Discover and excel at what your organization needs from you the most. You can get it at my website, and you can get it wherever books are sold at www.bermanleadership.com. And you can follow me on LinkedIn at Dr. Bill Berman. And the fundamental message is know what your job is and be really good at it. Know what the culture is and adapt to it, and then start asking for more and solve problems and have impact because you've built up that influence over time. That's the fundamental message.
And at your website, was it Berman Leadership? They could also inquire and learn more about your one-on-one and your company or family office coaching as well, correct?
Absolutely. There's a contact us page. And you can always email me at bill@bermanleadership.com.
Excellent. It's been great having you on, Bill. I'm going to do a super quick close. Everyone, I'm Angelo Robles, host of the Angelo Robles podcast and the founder and CEO at Family Office Association. Learn about us more several ways. I'm very active on social media. We're Family Office on YouTube. You could certainly learn about us as well at familyofficeassociation.com. Perhaps consider becoming a member, have more favorable access to many of the things that we do and some of our research, our master classes, our physical events, which we're still selectively doing via roundtables, as well as invites to our digital program where you hear it live, not recorded a month or 2 or 3 months later when it often goes up, and interact as well, and much more. So you could find it. It's easy. My direct email, angelo@familyofficeassociation.com. Everyone, thank you so much. Bill, it's great to talk to you. Look forward to having you on again. I wish you the best. Thank you.
Thanks.